Hey there, friends. Andrew here with mushroomspawnstore.com. And in today's short little video, we're going to go over some of the product features for our all in one mushroom grow bags. And you're going to see why this method and these bags are the easiest way to grow mushrooms at home. So, starting at the top, we have a really sturdy 10 millimeter heat seal. And this seal is virtually indestructible, and it's gonna stay intact when you reach the break and shake portion of the process. Below that, we have the zero point 0.2 micron filter patch, which is going to allow gas exchange during the growing process and the colonization process. And it's going to keep the bag sterile. Down further, we have the foam injector port, which is integral to the bag, far superior than the little neoprene stickers that some companies or some bag manufacturers use. This actually has a secondary layer of plastic, if you can see it there, that goes over top of the foam pad, which helps keep it in place, maintaining the integrity and the sterility of the bag after you inoculate. Now, for the contents of the bag, there is about 1.2 to 1.25 pounds of grain. And that's organic grain that we source locally here in Michigan. As you can see, it's well hydrated. Try and get these reflections. There we go. It's well hydrated, but it's not overhydrated. And that's important. We don't want mushy, wet grains that can, lead to issues with bacteria. Um, Usually there's at least a chance that there's some bacteria present in a spore syringe, which normally wouldn't be an issue. But if presented with the right conditions, such as an anaerobic, wet, mushy spot in a bag, that bacteria can ruin the bag. So we take great care to keep the grain intact, unexploded. I mean, some of it, no matter what, there's always cracked and burst grains, but we really keep it to a minimum. And we make sure that the bags do not have excess moisture in the grain once they're cooled. In addition to that grain, we have about 3/4 of a pound of our compost, which the blend is proprietary, but it consists of um, all organic materials, which we also source locally to us here in Michigan. And you'll also notice that we don't mix the bag before bagging the materials, or we don't mix the product or the materials before making the bag. So we keep the grain separate from the substrate. And that's a superior method. It's a little bit more expensive because it adds an additional labor step to filling the bags, but it does yield a superior result. It allows you to monitor the initial stages of growth. It helps with the speed of colonization. And you're going to have to break and mix up the bag eventually, but this really helps you focus the initial colonization into the grain so that when you do mix it, you are spreading those colonized grains throughout the substrate, which leads to faster time to full colonization. And it's also a transparency thing. So we're not hiding our grain content. Some companies, their bags really just don't have that much grain in them, which is fine and all. But at the end of the day, grain is where most of the yield comes from when we're talking about growing at home on a small scale. So if the bag has lower grain content overall, your yields will be lower. And so we think it's nice to show that you're getting a healthy amount of grain in these bags. We favor, instead of 50-50, we favor the grain because that is where the yield comes from. And the substrate is primarily just a little moisture reservoir because mushrooms are 90% water. And so we need some extra moisture in the bag to help maximize the yield that we get out of the grain. So I think that about wraps it up. Um, One last thing when comparing growing methods to consider. I know Uncle Ben's tech is extremely popular method because the pouches are really cheap. But one thing you'll have to consider is that they don't have the filter patch. It doesn't have an injector port. You will still need to buy the substrate. The bags themselves are not clear, so you can't monitor colonization or know if there's any sort of contamination going on until you open it. It requires that additional step of mixing colonized rice pouches into the substrate, which exposes you to the risks of contamination or introducing contamination and a failure of the grow. And so these bags, having been designed specifically for growing mushrooms with all of the proper ingredients in the proper proportions, um, really is a better value. So they're not necessarily cheap, but they do offer the best value and the best user experience. So consider giving us a shot. You can check us out at mushroomspawnstore.com and have a blessed day. Mush love.